Your Honor, the shell company listed among its beneficial owners is William Montgomery. That's you, isn't it, Judge? The courtroom froze as the quiet attorney revealed the corruption that would send the powerful judge to prison. If you're new to Unbreakable Tales, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Have you ever been in a room where everyone underestimated you? Where powerful people looked right through you like you were invisible? Then you're going to understand exactly what drove Amanda Reynolds to risk everything in the pursuit of justice. Amanda wasn't what you'd call a standout. Not at first glance, anyway. As she walked through the imposing mahogany doors of the county courthouse that morning, her modest white blouse and simple pulled back hair made her practically invisible among the sea of expensive suits. 15 years as an attorney, and still, most people mistook her for a paralegal or court reporter. But Amanda Reynolds had something the expensive suits didn't: a spine of steel and a mind like a steel trap. "You sure you're up for this?" Richard Barnes, her colleague, asked as they met at the courthouse entrance. The concern in his weathered face was impossible to miss. "Judge Montgomery has a reputation. They don't call him the Hammer for nothing." Amanda clutched her worn leather portfolio tighter. Inside was the result of 11 months of painstaking investigation, evidence that would either save her elderly client's home or destroy Amanda's career entirely. "Someone has to stand up for Mrs. Wilson," she replied simply. "She'll lose everything if we don't." What Richard didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Amanda Reynolds wasn't just fighting for one elderly widow. She was about to blow the lid off a corruption scheme that reached all the way to the judge's chambers. The courtroom fell silent as Judge William Montgomery swept in, his silver hair perfectly styled, his black robe somehow more regal than his peers. His piercing eyes swept the room like searchlights before landing on Amanda with visible disappointment. First case, Midwest Banking Corporation versus Eleanor Wilson. "Foreclosure proceeding," the clerk announced. James Preston from the opposing counsel stood with practiced confidence. "James Preston of Preston and Associates, representing Midwest Banking Corporation, Your Honor." Amanda rose next. "Amanda Reynolds, representing Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, Your Honor." Judge Montgomery's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Miss Reynolds," he said, drawing out her name, "I don't believe I've seen you in my courtroom before." "I typically handle cases in the Eastern District, Your Honor," Amanda responded politely. The judge nodded, a thin smile appearing. "Well, I trust you'll find our proceedings straightforward. Mr. Preston, you may begin." What happened next set the tone for everything. Preston launched into a flawless presentation: missed payments, proper notifications, standard foreclosure protocols. The banking corporation's case seemed airtight. Throughout it all, Amanda took occasional notes, looking to all the world like she was overwhelmed by Preston's polished delivery. But appearances can be deceiving. When Amanda's turn came, she stood calmly. "Your Honor, we contend that this foreclosure is fundamentally fraudulent. Mrs. Wilson's payment history shows no delinquency until the bank's computer system was upgraded last year. We have documentation proving all payments were made on time." Judge Montgomery's expression hardened instantly. "That's a serious accusation, counsel." "We have the evidence to support it, Your Honor." "I'm sure you believe you do," the judge replied, condescension dripping from every word. "Proceed with your evidence presentation, but I advise you to be very certain before alleging fraud against a respected financial institution." Amanda nodded, unfazed. "I'm quite certain, Your Honor." That's when the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift. Amanda methodically laid out evidence of Mrs. Wilson's consistent payment history: bank statements, receipts, electronic transfer records, forming a clear pattern until 8 months ago when the bank suddenly claimed 3 missed payments. "As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson's automatic payments continued to be withdrawn from her account," Amanda explained, displaying the bank statements. "Yet somehow they weren't credited to her mortgage." Judge Montgomery looked bored. "Computer errors happen, counsel. That hardly constitutes fraud." "If it were just a computer error, the situation would have been corrected when Mrs. Wilson brought it to the bank's attention," Amanda continued, her voice steady. "Instead, they added late fees, refused to acknowledge the payments she could prove she made, and fast-tracked the foreclosure despite her 40 years of perfect payment history." The first crack in Preston's armor appeared when he stood and said something that changed everything. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson's evidence is the result of her own record-keeping errors. Furthermore, given Mrs. Wilson's age and the documented early signs of cognitive decline in her medical records— Objection! Amanda interrupted. Mrs. Wilson's medical records aren't relevant to this proceeding and weren't subpoenaed or submitted as evidence. A deathly silence fell over the courtroom. How did Preston have Mrs. Wilson's medical information? Even Judge Montgomery couldn't ignore this breach. Mr. Preston, explain how you came to possess the defendant's medical information. Preston hesitated. General discovery, Your Honor. No medical records were requested or provided during discovery, Amanda stated firmly. This represents a serious privacy violation and further suggests coordination between the plaintiff and external parties to build a false case against my client. The judge's expression darkened. Miss Reynolds, that's an extraordinary claim. Are you suggesting impropriety by opposing counsel? I'm stating facts, Your Honor, facts that form a disturbing pattern. That's when Judge Montgomery showed his hand, his jaw tightened visibly as he threatened. Watch yourself, counsel. Unfounded accusations in my courtroom can result in sanctions. What happened next would later be discussed in law schools across the country. Amanda approached the bench with a quiet confidence that puzzled everyone watching. The meek attorney they'd all dismissed was suddenly standing tall, her voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, she began once she and Preston stood before the bench, I'd like to enter several documents into evidence. Proceed. Montgomery sighed theatrically. First, Exhibit A, Mrs. Wilson's complete payment history, certified by 2 independent auditors. The judge glanced at them dismissively. Second, Exhibit B, internal communications from Midwest Banking Corporation discussing what they call Operation Harvest, a program targeting properties in appreciating neighborhoods owned by elderly individuals with significant equity. The judge's head snapped up. What is this? Communications obtained legally through a whistleblower, Your Honor, Amanda replied calmly. And finally, Exhibit C, financial disclosures showing property investments made through shell companies partially owned by several prominent individuals. Judge Montgomery's face flushed crimson. What exactly are you implying, counsel? Amanda met his gaze directly. I'm not implying anything, Your Honor. The documents speak for themselves. The tension in that courtroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Everyone could feel that something monumental was unfolding before their eyes. Miss Reynolds, he said through clenched teeth, approach the bench. Mr. Preston, you too. At the bench, Judge Montgomery's voice was low and threatening. What exactly do you think you're doing? Presenting relevant evidence in my client's case, Your Honor, Amanda replied evenly. These allegations are preposterous, Preston interjected. This so-called Operation Harvest document is likely fabricated, and these financial records, even if authentic, have no bearing on Mrs. Wilson's defaulted mortgage. The judge nodded. I agree. Miss Reynolds, I'm excluding these documents as irrelevant and potentially defamatory. This was the moment when Amanda Reynolds revealed who she truly was. Your Honor, respectfully, you cannot exclude these documents. Montgomery's eyes widened in disbelief. Excuse me? Federal Rules of Evidence 401 and 402 clearly establish that evidence having any tendency to make a fact more or less probable is relevant and admissible unless specifically excluded by the Constitution, federal statutes, or other rules. I'm aware of the federal rules, counsel, the judge snapped. I determine relevance in my courtroom. Yes, Your Honor, Amanda continued calmly. However, in Hutchinson v. Hensley, the Supreme Court established that evidence suggesting systematic targeting of vulnerable homeowners is always relevant in contested foreclosure cases. Preston frowned. I'm not familiar with that case. 2018, Your Honor. Justice Kagan wrote the majority opinion. Judge Montgomery's face betrayed his uncertainty, which quickly turned to anger. Miss Reynolds, if you're deliberately misrepresenting precedent— I would never do that, Your Honor, Amanda interrupted, reaching into her portfolio. I have the relevant excerpt here. She handed the printout to the judge, who scanned it with increasing discomfort. Returning to her table, Amanda continued her methodical dismantling of their scheme. Your Honor, I'd like to call our first witness, Michael Turner, former data analyst at Midwest Banking Corporation and the whistleblower who provided the Operation Harvest documents. A man in his 30s stood up from the spectator section and walked toward the witness stand. "Objection!" Preston nearly shouted. "We received no witness list from opposing counsel." "Actually, Mr. Preston," Amanda turned to him, "I submitted my complete witness list 3 weeks ago. I have the certified mail receipt and the court clerk's acknowledgement. Mr. Turner was listed as witness number 3. The clerk nervously confirmed this. "She's correct, Your Honor. The witness list was properly filed." Judge Montgomery's composure was visibly cracking. "Did you receive this witness list?" he asked Preston. Preston hesitated. "I would need to check with my team." Perhaps Mr. Preston was too busy accessing my client's private medical records to review properly submitted discovery materials, Amanda suggested. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Montgomery banged his gavel for silence, his face reddening. Then Amanda delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, before Mr. Turner testifies, I believe the court should be aware that the shell company mentioned in Exhibit C, Mountain View Properties, lists among its beneficial owners a William Montgomery. I'm curious if that's merely a coincidence." The judge froze, his gavel suspended midair. The courtroom collectively held its breath. "These proceedings will be in recess for 15 minutes, he finally announced, his voice strained. "Counsel for both parties in my chambers, now." What transpired in those chambers would later be pieced together from court records and testimony. Amanda laid out her full case, not just for Mrs. Wilson, but against the entire operation. "I've been working with federal prosecutors for 11 months, Amanda explained to the stunned men. "Mrs. Wilson's case isn't unique. It's one of 78 we've identified." The color drained from Judge Montgomery's face. "You were building a case all along." "Yes, Your Honor. Your financial entanglements with Midwest Banking and Mountain View made you a person of interest early in the investigation. Your treatment of me today was predictable." A knock at the door interrupted them. 2 men in suits entered, showing FBI credentials. "Judge William Montgomery," one said formally, "we need you to come with us to answer some questions." Preston stood shakily. "I need to call my attorney." "That would be advisable," Amanda noted, "though you might want to find representation outside your firm." When Amanda returned to the courtroom alone, confused murmurs filled the air. Mrs. Wilson clutched her purse anxiously. "What's happening?" she whispered as Amanda sat beside her. "Justice, Mrs. Wilson," Amanda replied softly. "Finally justice." The courtroom doors opened again as 2 FBI agents escorted Judge Montgomery out, followed by additional agents leading a visibly shaken James Preston. The spectators erupted in shocked conversations. In the aftermath, Judge Eliza Harmison took over the case, a judge known for her fierce independence and ethical standards. Mrs. Wilson's home was saved, and dozens of other elderly victims would soon find justice. 1 month later, Amanda sat in her modest office reviewing case files. The Harvest Scandal, as the press had dubbed it, continued to unfold across front pages nationwide. Judge Montgomery had resigned from the bench and was facing federal charges for corruption, fraud, and racketeering. James Preston and 3 other partners at his firm had been indicted. Midwest Banking Corporation's stock had plummeted, and class action lawsuits were mounting. Richard entered carrying a newspaper. "Still making headlines," he remarked, tossing the paper on her desk. "The justice system works slowly, but it does work," Amanda replied. "The partners want to talk about making you head of the new consumer protection division they're creating. Your name has become quite the asset." Amanda smiled slightly. "I'm not interested in being anyone's asset." Before she could elaborate, her phone rang. The U.S. Attorney's Office. After a brief conversation, Amanda hung up and gazed out her window at the city skyline. She had just been offered a position leading a new task force on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. Her computer chimed with an email notification from Mrs. Wilson, with photos of her grandchildren visiting her at the home she had almost lost. The subject line read simply, "Thank you for fighting when no one else would." That evening, as Amanda cleared out her office, having accepted the U.S. Attorney's offer, she reflected on the events that had led her here. Judge Montgomery had seen a quiet woman he thought he could intimidate. He never suspected she had quietly built a case that would bring down an entire corrupt network. The truth was simpler than anyone realized. She had merely been patient, thorough, and unbending in her pursuit of justice. The corruption had exposed itself once someone was willing to look closely enough. Life teaches us that appearances can be deceiving. The most dangerous opponent isn't always the loudest in the room. Sometimes it's the quiet one who watches, listens, and waits for exactly the right moment to act. Sometimes the most unbreakable people are the ones no one sees coming. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove your strength when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of quiet courage inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe to Unbreakable Tales for more stories of extraordinary resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Remember, true strength isn't always visible until it's tested.